Each game in the Saints Row franchise was heavily inspired by a single idea to create the basic premise of each game. For example, Saints Row 1 was inspired by hip-hop music videos, Saints Row 2 was inspired by the first game but expanded the game's outlandishness and irreverence, Saints Row the Third went all out with the outlandishness, Saints Row 4 was inspired by superpowers and the supernatural, and Get Out of Hell was inspired by Disney films. At some point during Saints Row's lifetime, a spin-off game was actually in development, named Money Shot. In the game, the player would control a bullet shot from a sniper rifle around various obstacles so that it can connect with its target. The game would feature 11 levels and one additional infinite level. The game was planned to release on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and Nintendo 3DS, but in the end development was cancelled due to THQ being shut down because of bankruptcy. In the early stages of development, Saints Row 4 was actually called Saints Row the Third Enter the Dominatrix, and was planned to actually be an expansion pack for Saints Row the Third. The game was first announced in 2012 as an April Fool's joke, but not too long after that the game went into development. In June 2012, THQ announced a change in direction and changed Enter the Dominatrix into DLC for the now released full sequel, Saints Row 4. Have you ever played an activity in one of the games and wondered where the idea for them came from? Well, if you haven't, well, it's actually more interesting than you might think. You see, during development of the first game, the developers looked at previous open world games and decided to innovate the genre by adopting the policy "everything matters." Design director Christopher Stockman felt that previous titles didn't reward the players enough for playing around in the open world because the story missions were separate, so the team decided to try and fix this problem, and thus activities were introduced into the franchise. The character we play as, commonly known as the protagonist, doesn't seem to have an actual name, at least not that we know of. I say this because on multiple occasions the protagonist is asked what their real name is, but they refuse to say it. For example, when the protagonist asks Zemos what his real name is, in Saints Row the Third, this happens.
I gotta ask.
If you gotta, you gotta.
What's your real name?
Shit, what's your?
Winston Churchill.
That's what I thought.
The name that our character says is obviously not our real name because our character refuses to say their real name to anyone. However, Kinsey Kensington is actually one of the only other characters to know the protagonist's real name, as revealed in Saints Row 4. It's possible that Bane was inspired by the Batman villain named Bane. The reason for this is because they both share many similarities. They both have large strong builds, both wear luchador style masks, both are very strategic, and both have the same favourite weapon, the rocket launcher. It's completely impossible to play a Saints Row game without knowing about the famous weapon known as the Penetrator, but did you know there are actually some pretty interesting facts about this weapon, such as the fact that the weapon was actually remodelled for Japanese markets in order to comply with stricter content regulations. The remodelling removed the sexual features and was supposed to remove the physics, but this didn't happen and the physics remained. However, the weapon was renamed in the Japanese version to Suspicious Bat. Oh, and also over 2 million people have been killed by the Penetrator. Johnny Gat's last name is actually not just a name, it's actually a slang term for handgun or machine pistol. It was also originally derived from Gatling gun, and all of these meanings make sense as Johnny does have a love for firearms. Also, Gat is the Korean word for hat, which is a hint that Johnny might be of Korean heritage, and this is actually a strong possibility because Johnny's voice actor Daniel Dae Kim, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, is also of Korean descent, and in Saints Row 3 they both seem to share a similar facial structure. The 31 theory is something that Kinsey mentions in her conversation with Josh in Saints Row the Third.
You know, at first I thought that Nightblade was a media trick trying to obfuscate the reality of our vampire problem.
Yeah, I don't think that was a...
Then I realized it was just a shitty vampire show.
That's a relief.
Of course then, by the time I realized that I really liked it. Kinda spoke to me.
That's great.
And that's when I realized it was because it fell perfectly into the 31 theory.
What?
The 31 theory. Anything important is always connected to a 31. Nightblade Season 3. Best season. Aired in January, had 13 episodes.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You are a good actor.
As you can tell, the theory suggests that everything important is linked to the number 31, and this is actually very true in the Saints Row franchise, as this joke has been seen in many places. For example, Tanya's code to the King's penthouse is 3131 in Saints Row 1, Johnny Gat says that he was in jail for 2 years and 31 days in Saints Row 2, the code for the elevator in the mission Party Time in Saints Row 3 is 3131, in Kinsey's second audio log of Saints Row 4, she states that the planetary defense system that she planned costed 3.1 billion, and there are so many more references to this number throughout the franchise. Since the series has been going for almost 10 years now, it's safe to say that some people must not know how the Third Street Saints were formed, so let's go back in time to before Saints Row 1. It all started when Julius Little grew up together with his best friend Benjamin King in Sunnyvale Gardens. After some time had passed, the Lost Carnals came to Stillwater and took over the city and abused Sunnyvale Gardens. Benjamin called all the people of Sunnyvale, including Julius, together to form a gang of their own so that they could fight back against the Carnals. This gang would later be known as the Vice Kings. However, Julius didn't like the way that the Vice Kings worked and left the gang shortly after, and while all this was happening, the West Side Rollers were formed and joined in on the fight. The three gangs would then go to use Saints Row as the battleground for their war, but at the same time this was also the district that Julius had fled to, and after not too much time, Julius gathered all the people he could find to the old church on 3rd Street, and thus the 3rd Street Saints were formed. That's it for this list, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!